Welcome to the Maker's Playbook, the podcast where we talk all about what it's really like to make a living from the things you make. I'm your host, Rebecca Ikes-Kara. Okay, so you know how last week I was talking about filling gaps in our interview lineup here on the podcast? How there are so many examples of people making a living from the things that they make with Instagram followers and shopped updates and packaging and shipping and rinse and repeat cycle, all of that. Well, I'm filling another gap this week, my friends. So I'm curious, is there an aspect of ceramics that you just love? I mean, the thing that blows my mind about this particular medium, other than any other art form, is how many different areas of expertise you're supposed to have in order to be a full-time pro. Not only do you need to know how to actually make your work from wet clay, whether that be on the wheel or hand building, you could even harvest and make that clay yourself. Then there's the engineering knowledge of kilns, the troubleshooting of equipment issues, and the chemistry of glazes. And maybe just one of those things you actually enjoy the most. If you didn't have to trim another pot in your life, but could just put on your mad scientist goggles and experiment with the various ways in which you can merge the elements of the periodic table to create a brand new crystalline glaze and get paid for it, never having to show up to your day job again, you might be perfectly happy. So the question is there a way to make a living from just one aspect of what you love to make? Do you have to be an artist, quote unquote, in the sense of the word that we currently perhaps automatically think of it as? Do you see where I'm going with this one? Because I realize there's not really a subtle hint here. While I'm sure there are a few other places to learn about glaze chemistry online, there's definitely one name that tops the list. This week on the Maker's Playbook podcast, I'm chatting with half of the partnership that make up Ceramic Materials Workshops. The one and only Matt Katz is on the podcast, my friends. Hey, Matt, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, it's great to be here.
Thank you for making the time. I feel like saying Matt isn't going to give it away to anybody as to who I'm actually maybe talking to.
No, the weird one is I never had a nickname. My whole life I've just been Matt Katz because there are so many Matts in my generation. Everybody just calls me Matt Katz.
Well, you do have those single syllable names that you have to do the two together.
Yeah.
But also I feel like how many people know you as Matt Katz and how many people know you as your Instagram moniker now at this point?
Right. The mysterious Ceramic Materials Workshop. Nobody knows because it's my wife and I who's ever answering the Instagram comments.
I think that was probably a savvy decision.
Yeah, that we detached ourselves because we could have just been like the Katzes or whatever, but we put the official secondary name on it just so that we had a little bit of freedom.
Well, for people who don't know what the heck we're talking about, tell me a little bit about the bird's eye view, the history. Who's Matt? What's the Ceramic Material Workshop? I can't imagine. But I asked the stupid questions, so somebody who doesn't know doesn't feel silly.
Yeah, so Ceramic Materials Workshop is me and my wife, Rose Katz, and we are an online education resource where we teach glaze and clay chemistry online to people all over the world. We have classes and online workshops and all sorts of things, and we've been doing this for years. We always have to say that now that everybody tries to go online. Like, we were doing this for years before COVID comes around. Everyone's like, oh my God, you saw the future. I'm like, I don't know. It's just what I was doing when we had babies. That was literally how we started.
That's awesome.
Rose had a real job and I was raising the children and I just started doing the online thing because of it. But yeah, so we teach glaze and clay to people all around the world because it's the thing that doesn't get taught. So we both came out of Alfred University and I've taught at Alfred for years. I teach at the Rhode Island School of Design, Montana State, I teach at Harvard Ceramics, a bunch of other schools, but we teach our classes to people, just the general public who want to learn glaze chemistry or how clay bodies work or what are all the myths and rumors out there. So we do that. We do consulting. And we just started our new podcast. So we're just trying to get the information about good glazes out there.
Amen. And as a person also with a spouse and partner who actually knows glazes, thank you. Thank you for teaching. He gets so riled up looking at people on Instagram and the stuff people are doing or selling different things, saying they're food safe, and he's looking at this going, that's not food safe, and like all this different stuff that he thanks you and I thank you. So did you guys both study ceramics at Alfred, or how? And also tell me how you managed
Sure.
to coordinate. My immediate thought with RISD and Montana and Harvard, I'm like, geographically, those are very different.
No, I never go anywhere. I've never been to Montana State.
That's
I've visited.
unfortunate too.
Yeah, I know. It's great. I absolutely. Next term, I'm teaching in the winter, and like it's cold and snowy in the winter term. So anyway, so we both did our undergraduates in the art school at Alfred. And I don't know if you know Alfred, but it's got the ceramic art school and a ceramic engineering school. And they like to say, oh yeah, there's all this interaction. There's a little bit, but it's not as much as you would think there is. I know,
for
shocking.
Education, you're missing something? No, sorry.
Yeah, they try. And I was especially lucky because I fell under the mentorship of an art professor named John Gill and an engineering professor, Bill Carty. And they were looking to try to make that bridge. This is many years ago. Mm-hmm. And they had asked me to be their guinea pig. So I finished my undergraduate studies and I went into the engineering department. And because of academics, the academic program that they were trying to make fell apart. But Dr. Carty asked me to stay around and keep doing research. And so I was sort of working with him in his research group. And he let me spend my time studying how ceramic science applies to artists, like very specifically, like how do artists look at materials? How do we use materials and all of that? So I did that for a number of years. And then my wife, she was also an undergraduate and she got into the tile industry. So she started designing glazes for a tile company. She moved up the ranks. She got chased by another tile company and they recruited her. And then that's actually how the online thing started because we were living in Alfred for all of those years.
Okay.
And when she got pursued by this other tile company, we left Alfred. Long story short, they said, oh, hey, we don't have anyone to teach your course if you're leaving town, the glaze and clay chemistry courses. And they said, can you figure out a way to do it? And I was like, yeah. And so we started doing it online. And it was really successful, but Alfred had its limitations. And so eventually we started Ceramic Materials Workshop to sort of open it up to the rest of the world. Yeah, that's where that came from. And then the other schools, when we struck out on our own, I went to a lot of people that I know. And Josh DeWeese at Montana State and Jeremy Hatch, I should say, both of them were one of the first people that said, hey, we don't have anyone on our faculty that teaches glaze calc. Could you teach for us? And since I already had this online platform that I did, I just sort of opened up a new class section and do it strictly for the students at Montana State. And then Montana State led to other schools. And we sort of pared that down. The schools are a lot of work, but now we keep it to the Alfred, RISD, Montana State, Harvard groups. And it's just a ton of fun and it keeps me busy.
Slightly known names in the arts upper
They are a little
higher
bit known.
Education of the U.S. It doesn't help give your street cred any recognition at all.
No benefit to the CV on that one.
Never heard of RISD before. Well, that's also fascinating because I'm curious just from a pros and cons, and we don't have to go too far down this rabbit hole, but it sounds to me you guys have taken that approach of making a living in higher education with artists, which is so common, I think, for so many people, but held on to the autonomy of it being a little bit in your control in your life, given that, okay, you don't have to say, our family has to live in Montana because I'm teaching at this one school, or I'm teaching at Harvard, or I'm teaching at RISD. Like, you've still got your autonomy, if you will.
We got very lucky with something, to be blunt, that is a curse in modern academia, which is the adjunct situation. Alfred is a great school, but they have historically a number of core faculty members, which it's called, and then they sort of dole out classes for less popular things. And glaze calc was always one of those things, and I happen to have a very particular passion for it, but I didn't have a permanent tenure track core faculty job. And what's happened in a lot of academia, not just in art, but in every single subject, is adjuncts, where they expect somebody to come in and teach one class, and you don't get paid a lot for it, but it's a lot of work. And part of what had happened is that we realized that with this online model that we created, that I could take a subject that most schools don't have or can't teach, or the faculty don't feel comfortable teaching, and that I could franchise it out from wherever I am. So we're up in the woods of New Hampshire now. And yeah, I love my students in Montana State. I haven't been to Montana in 20 years. I'd love to go out and visit them, but it all works on Zoom.
Yeah. That's fantastic. And to touch upon that, the adjunct side of things, there's a woman on my team on the photography side of things who teaches adjunct photography at DePaul. And she has blatantly told me, like, if there's an inquiry for a corporate gig, for example, that comes in that she's a great fit for, if she has a class that day and there's a way to have them have a different assignment, if it's a gig that's 3 hours or longer, not even 2 hours or longer, she's getting paid better from my little independent business than her class time, which is crazy.
It's no joke. The reality is that the adjunct lifestyle is not a good financial return. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'll be blunt. It is hard when you are stuck to whatever is your geographic school. Yeah. And we're taking advantage of that in the way that we structured our classes. And it even has become more complicated than that, because when we started teaching to non-academics, that is now incredibly popular, like insanely popular, to the point where I can't take adjunct jobs anymore. Yeah. It takes so much work that, like I have these schools because they're all very nice names, but honestly, like they're the people that came to me first. Mm-hmm. And I'm just like, okay, I'm loyal to you and you and you, and that's all I can handle. And we have other schools approach us and I'd love to help them, but it's teaching is so much work, especially at the university level.
What's fascinating to me as someone who came into clay post school, being able to have the resources of such an advanced deep dive into a subject in a way that meets you wherever you are in the world. Because the thing that I was recognizing as I'm trying to really get serious about wanting to improve and make changes and stuff like this, and not just go from, for the first couple of years, I was working at a fabulous community studio in Chicago. I learned tons there. They're wonderful and I miss them. But once a week classes of just basic new projects is completely different than a deep dive the way that you do when you're in school. And anybody over the age of 30 trying to learn something but is living somewhere or has a partner or has a house or has any kind of commitment, like your solution to that is very limited.
Well, and that is the great part about community studios, that you can go in and take 6 weeks, 2 months, 3 months, and spend time developing your studio practice sort of at your pace. Maybe it's one night a week, maybe it's, twice a week, whatever. One of the big problems with teaching glazes that we just found from the start, it's not an easy subject. It is a deep dive subject. There is no way around it. And you might have a studio that'll do a weekend short course on here's doing a little bit of glazes. It is not enough. Like we historically, before COVID, we would do workshops. We don't do a lot of them because, again, it's really hard to pack all the information that you need to into a weekend, into so much time. And what we basically said is we have to teach this on our terms. We need people to commit to the time. We need people to commit to the learning process, commit to the chemistry, all these type of things. And we just said, we're going to put this out there on our terms, and we hope people will come to us. And they have, which has been great. But our position is very much like there's no easy way to learn certain subjects. And so we have to focus on doing it right.
Yeah. For people who haven't ever heard of the course, tell them a little bit about, like, next time when they're ready to sign up, what's some of the commitment level?
Sure. We have a couple of different things. We have what we call our online workshops, which are completely self-guided. You sign up, you watch them whenever you want. And most of it's based around a recorded lecture or series of lectures. So we've got our workshops, Glaze of Our Lives, which is glazes for the beginner, which is just telling you what is a glaze? How do you look at a formula? What are some things that you should know? How do you deal with these minor problems and all that? Then we've got some other workshops on the specifics of Cone 6 and stuff like that. And like I said, those are, you sign up, you watch it on your lunch break, you put it on in the background in the studio, however you want. That's all self-guided. And then we have our full-on classes. The primary one we call Understanding Glazes, and that is a 3-month, it's full on. It's my university courses that we just do for the public. So with that, we've got recorded lectures, but we also have experiments. I give out assignments. Everybody comes together. They do it at their studio. They digitally document it. And then they come back to me 2 weeks later and we look at the experiments together. We just have these incredible collections of people. We have students on every continent in over 100 countries that we've taught in. But they're all just sharing this information because chemistry is universal. It always works. It becomes this really cool community of people all working together. And so those are 3 months, and those you go through the course. And then we have advanced glazes courses and courses on clay bodies and all that kind of stuff. But it's like a full-on course. It's like I said, you do it from a university or an intensive from a local studio.
That's awesome. I was stifling a laugh when you said chemistry always works, because I feel like for anybody who's tested a new glaze recipe, they might not. I know what you're saying, but it doesn't feel like that.
It depends on the information that you're being fed. One of the hardest things out there is the stuff that you see in magazines and the stuff that you see in books and on the internet.
Spoiler.
So we have a phrase for it. And again, this is an adult podcast, but like we call it glaze porn because it's meant to sell you and like how great it looks. And if something's in a book, that's the best picture of the best result of that glaze they ever got, lit under studio lighting. And they're trying to sell you on how
professional.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're trying to sell you on how great that glaze is because that's how they get you to buy the book.
Right.
And our position is, okay, let's get realistic. Okay, we'll move past the picture and see how it really works and then start to understand why does the picture in the book not look like yours and how do you make yours look like that? And again, that manipulating the chemistry and working with it. We try to be excessively pragmatic, but that's like I was saying, that's why we say there's no easy answers. Like you have to understand why. There's no like, give me the hot glaze and then move on. I don't do that. That's not how it works.
There's an obvious segue of then also when they're photographing their new glaze and it still doesn't look right, they have to come to me. And we can talk about color temperature and the lighting you're using and why you can't get your glaze to photograph the way it's supposed to photograph.
When we show our glazes that Rose and I test, we actually unphotoshop our glazes. We sit there and we try not to do anything fancy with our lighting. We've got some multicolor temperature lights and we've got some nice cameras and stuff, but we'll sit there like in front of Lightroom or Photoshop and we'll like literally look at the image and then look at what's showing up on our screen and then like tone it down and try to get it more realistic looking. Because even like a mirrorless camera, like they sweeten it. You throw some bokeh on there and it's all like hot. Tone it down. Try to get realistic.
We just got to get you out of auto shooting because there's a lot of automatic settings that are.
We do.
But no, I appreciate that getting serious. Appreciate that mentality around it because that's 1,000% my structure of a lot of people have asked me to, hey, are you going to ever sell presets or filters or whatever? And those are fine. But until you understand why what's happening is happening, right. To me, I was even having this conversation with one of my students. Somebody pointed out, I didn't teach anybody a specific style of shooting. I taught them why things happen, because in that way, if you decide a year from now, 2 years from now, that your style of the way you want to photograph things or your style of pottery changes and it should be photographed differently, you already have the knowledge of how to do that. It's not like, okay, here's how you shoot light and airy, and there you go.
We do that with our glaze testing instruction too, where like we just started a term, so some of my students might be hearing this before they get their glaze results, but like we design tests to have tests that fail. Like I build that into the structure because I think it's important for students to know why things don't work. So then they have the parameters of what does work. So we specifically design it into every test set. Yeah, they will have glazes that will fail and will look like garbage so that we can then talk about it and understand it and put it into perspective.
Or sell it to Seth Rogen. I couldn't resist. I know. It was just too, when I first started seeing this stuff come out, I was like, okay, you're being intentional about those, but I'm not so sure.
He's done that all himself. I will say Seth has been a student and was lovely and gave him some glazes and pointed him in the right direction. And it's all his inspiration. He's actually very well exposed and very well spoken about ceramic.
Oh, yeah. All in good fun. I feel like if there's any a humorous celebrity, it all evens out. But anyway.
I couldn't think of a better advocate for the ceramics community. So
I also cannot think of someone else who garnished more DMs from random friends and past photography clients of mine who were just like, "Oh my gosh, look can you make this? Seth Rogen makes pottery." Blah blah. I was like, "Yes, guys." Yeah. Like I'm not selling pot. Sorry. But it was a very savvy merging of terminology and words. And anyways, that's a different. We can see if we can get him out on the podcast sometime. You can throw it his way and we'll have a whole chat. I can think of a list of people that will be ecstatic, but none of them are potters that regularly listen to this podcast. All right, I digress.
I'm amazed at the potters who don't know who he is or stumble upon it, and how it's still cross-pollinating. But it's all pushing the conversation forward. I've only been in ceramics for 25 years. And Rose and I came up in the 90s, and how many people did we have say, people are still making pottery? Is that going to be a thing? You're going to commit your life to this? And we're like, yeah, of course.
It's like,
why not?
Well, those pieces that survived massive environmental crises and are now in museums, I feel like it's going to stick around.
Yeah. Making will always be a thing. That's human nature.
Let's talk about that actually a little bit, because I feel like that's a common thing. And whether this be with your college, your traditional college students, or your ceramic materials workshops, online students, like your whatever other phrase I was trying to think of, non-traditional students is the word I was looking for. Because so many people come into the making world assuming you're always going to have another job, or you're not going to make a living with it, or you're going away to college and really you're majoring in ceramics. Do you have a backup? What's the other option, right? That's the default. The assumption is like something's not going to work out. And what has been that experience over 25 years of getting told that, and now here we are.
It's hard. There's no doubt about that. I once had one of the more famous ceramic artists that's been in my life once tell me, though, that the only way to make a career in ceramics is to not quit. And that's the truth. I've known people, like people I went to school with, people I've known that gave up, and because it was too much. It's something broke, and I get it. You always have those moments where you question yourself, where you question, do people like what I'm doing? Am I doing the right thing? All of that. And it's hard. It's no doubt it's hard. And even what Rose and I do, like you, when we were talking online, like I'm not a maker. Like I assist makers, I help makers, but I don't have a studio practice besides making test tiles and making glaze tests. And I fire more than anyone I know. Like I fire every day, probably multiple kilns. But it just comes out as test tiles because that's what we make. I don't make a mug. I don't make a bowl. We're sort of here to help other people make. But you can do it. It definitely, I think my academic friends are going to get angry with me, but I think academia makes it a little bit harder because in academia, it's just taught on the making part. And like I always say that people ask me, like going to grad school. Like I went to grad school, Rose didn't. And people always say, should I go to grad school? And my answer is always like, well, you go to grad school for two reasons. One, if you want to be a better artist. And two, if you want to be a teacher. And that's it. There's no other reason to go to graduate school. And both of those are completely valid reasons. But that's why when you come across CMW stuff, I'm always talking because Rose didn't want to get into teaching. She's much more shy and I'm loud. And so it just balances out. But can you make it as a maker? Absolutely. You just have to make. There is definitely concerns that I would probably say to up and coming makers about the marketplace. One of the hardest things I always say to my students, because I did sort of go and dip my toes in industry and Rose did work in industry for a long time, is that the thing that you have to focus is, although we love the making part of it, the getting pots out the door is actually the relevant metric. You have to get pots out the door, and you get into ceramics because you want to spend that time on the wheel. Yeah, well, unfortunately, spending time on the wheel is going to be 5% of your time if you're trying to make a go at it full time, because you've got to be doing the bookkeeping and the QuickBooks and the marketing and the Instagram packaging and shipping and returns and all that stuff. And even with CMW, like I said, I was raising the kids. Literally, Rose had a real corporate job and we had left Alfred for her corporate job. And I was raising the kids. Like we have two boys and we had just had one, the youngest. And within a year, I was losing my mind because my first year's taxes, I went to an accountant with a Ziploc bag full of receipts and a spreadsheet. And I said, I think that this is okay. And she got very sad looking at me. And I was like, okay, Rose, I need you to come in and help me just run the business things. And that's what she came in and stepped in and said, okay, make the business part of it work, but you have to make it work.
Yeah. You make a great point. The thing I noticed is having the photography business for 11 years, the growth that I saw being by myself was so different than some of my closest friends who were partner studios, and one person had one skill set and somebody else had another skill set. and the exponential growth they had.
Yep.
Other things, other variables, obviously. But if we were to just look at those two things, our businesses are in radically different places 11 years later. So having that support network, when Alex Matisse and I talked about, this is one thing he said. If he gave anybody any advice on that episode, he said, go get a partner who has a completely different skill set. If you're the maker, they can't be the maker, et cetera, et cetera.
I love what modern ceramics is, but I think that there is a fantasy that has pervaded modern American making that I think is based on the notion of the philosophical soul potter, of the person who has the time and the center in their life to focus explicitly on the pottery. And that is a gift. That it's not unreal, it's not a fantasy, but it is not a reality for most. And when you go, what everybody should do if you ever get the opportunity is go to a third world country to a pottery. And what you're going to find is dozens and dozens of people that are working together to make the object. And the people that throw are not the same people that trim. The people that move wear boards around are not the people that glaze. Everybody has a very specific job. And in modern ceramics, we're told, do it all. Yep. You can do it all. And no, it's really, really hard to do that and to get a return on your time, because your time is your investment and you hope a return on it. And it's harder when you're on your own. And even one partner makes a difference. Rose was enough to push me over the edge. And I think that you do need someone. And even if you are a maker, I would encourage you to find a partner maker. And that can be fraught. You could get somebody that's a bust, but if there's someone out there that can help you get more done, that's a great benefit.
The fascinating thing to me coming from one medium and getting into ceramics is also that if you are trying to be a solo maker, the amount of knowledge that you need in seemingly completely disparate skill sets to make a pot at the end of the day, to eat out of a bowl that you've made. Okay, say you're going to buy your clay and you're not going to make it. So then there's one section you're going to get away with. So you've got to be good at either hand building or throwing. You've got to maybe be good at also trimming, which is a skill set unto itself. You've then got to understand chemistry to a certain degree, or mechanical engineering to fix a kiln when an element goes haywire or what have you. I don't know any other medium in the traditional or non-traditional field of art that requires those many different skills to complete the piece.
Yeah, I wish our community was better at breaking that down, because again, that there's this thing, and I see it in academia all the time, where the professor is expected to know all the things. And I literally exist because I had professors that were amazing and gifted and talented and smart and generous and all of that. And I would still ask a glaze question and the answer would be like, you can never predict what glazes will do. And I would not accept that. I was like, no, that does not, no, because otherwise we wouldn't have modern materials science. We wouldn't have phones. We wouldn't have computers if you just couldn't predict what materials would do. And I've had so many people tell me, oh yeah, no, chemistry doesn't apply to art. The way we do it's differently. I've had people that have written glaze books tell me that. And I'm like, no, we can understand. You don't understand.
Right.
And so you just say, we don't understand. But let's be clear, that's about you. And my goal has always been like, we're going to really understand this.
That's awesome. That reminds me of talking with Simon, people saying, oh, the magic of a wood fire, which is true, but also like if you know your kiln, he gets repetitive results over and over.
Your flame path, you know what temperature you got to hit, when to stoke it and when to hold it, when to shut it down. That's learning your process.
And how to pack it. And yep. And I have no segue because I just got really wrapped up in that process. Since you're interacting with so many students, are there some through lines or some archetypes or some commonalities that you see a lot from your students that you wish makers, and I would say especially people who aren't your traditional undergrad student, the older crowd or the people that you're teaching online, that you feel like people are either missing or really need to know, or I'm not quite sure where I'm going with it. I'm hoping something's coming to mind.
I got you, I think. I always say as a teacher that there's always this perception out there that like teachers have favorite students. Like, you went to a class, you're like, oh yeah, they totally like that student.
It's totally Seth Rogen.
No, because actually, but what I would say is that teachers absolutely do have favorites. They're the students who bother to give a damn. The students who bother to engage and to show, hey, I'm interested in what you have to teach me. And I will take any of those people and tuck you up under my wing, and we will go and explore a whole new world of glazes. And that's who our students are. By the time they come to us, they have gotten to that same point of frustration that I was at, where they're like, I've had these great teachers, and then they tell me this thing and it doesn't work, or this thing doesn't work, and I need to know why. And we get exceptionally lucky that basically all of our students come to us already wanting to know why, not being satisfied with the way it is. And so to me, that's always the good student of just ready to learn, absolutely open and ready to learn. And that's what you need. And I just wish that the teaching community would admit their limitations. I think that's my greater thing, because again, just hundreds and thousands of art students, and you get the person in there and you go into your first class. So I have to tell a funny story. So when I started doing pottery in high school, and I had a teacher, I loved her. I'll call her Kat Logan. She knows this. We've had this conversation almost 30 years ago. And she came into our school new, and she brought a potter's wheel and changed my life. That was it. I was always into art, but I'd never done ceramics. She brought her own personal wheel into the school, and that was it. I was off. I went straight to Alfred out of high school. Like, that set my career. And then many years ago, I had a show back in Maine where I grew up, and she came to my show. And I just said, Kat, I cannot tell you like how thankful I am for what you did. And she said, oh, I'm so proud of you and all that. And she said, I was doing pottery like 6 months before I met you. Like, that was my entire story. She's like, I'm a painter. I didn't really do it, but I had the wheel. And so I figured take it in for the kids. And I'm like, yeah, okay, good enough. Good enough. Teachers have to take that role of authority, and the students don't know any better. And sometimes it's okay to say like, I don't know.
That's amazing.
And yeah, it's all good as long as you're willing to learn.
That's really funny, because my first experience, when I really think back to it, there were some summer classes as a kid that I had the opportunity to do at like the local college that did different camp things and whatnot. But then really in 2009, 2010, I did a post-grad year of like full-time service. So the Peace Corps without the government, so to speak. And it was at a purpose-built art center for at-risk kids in Newcastle upon Tyne, England. So super far north in England. And they had a ceramics room, and I was completely enamored. And my friend Liv found out she was pregnant, and she was the one that had the professional background experience. And she's like, so I'm going on a maternity leave. Want to take over the studio? Like, the kiln's already programmed. Just hit this button and fire it when when it's ready. And so, of course, the kids there's 2 wheels, and they want me to help them make something better than a falling down ashtray. And I'm like, no. It's important that you see it through. You have to follow through. This is your project. Meanwhile, it's just because I can't center any better than this 8-year-old kid. Yep. And that was my first foray into ceramics. And every weekend I would go in when nobody was there and turn on music and practice and not save any of it and double the size of the slop bucket. And, yep.
No one would ever know.
Nope. So when you went to Alfred, were you envisioning making a living as a ceramist and being a maker, so to speak, or?
I don't know. My parents were always very supportive of whatever I wanted to do. And I was either going to art school or theater school. So either way, they didn't have a choice.
Neither one has healthcare.
No. And my closest friend still to this day, she went to the theater school, and like we see each other's lifestyles. But they were always cool. I guess the one not advantage that I had, but the good advice is that my parents said, okay, you can go to school, but here's the deal. When you're on summer vacations, you have to go get a job at a gallery or a production pottery or something in your field. They said, we're not going to pressure you to work at McDonald's. We're not going to but you have to go. And they said, if we have to subsidize your gas, if you've got to drive farther, that you can. And that's what I did. I worked one summer at a gallery and one summer at a production pottery in between my first couple of years in college. And it did change my perception as to what it meant to do it, to make a life out of it. And it's not romantic, but it's able to make a living doing what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it definitely influenced my perception of what it should be. And I think that was important because, again, we're always in that place of, what do you do after school? What should I do professionally? And I didn't chase that path, but it made me just look at what was the general path that most of my fellow students were doing, and made me go, okay, that's one way. What are the others?
Yeah. That's genius, I feel like. Because
Don't tell my parents.
I just assume it gave you the taste of real life. I had incredible professors at DePaul. I'm still good friends with many of them. But you didn't get a feel for, all of a sudden I found myself starting a business because I came out of school in 2009. And gee, were people hiring then? Nope. I mean, I ultimately wound up with a degree in graphic design because I thought that was going to be the employable art. I designed all these annual reports and all this stuff so I could go get a safe job. That didn't happen. That's frankly the only reason I started my business. But I didn't know. Thankfully, I'm good at building rapport and an extrovert to be able to network and market and all that kind of stuff. Because
when I was in school, there were no business for artist classes. Now Alfred has got some. And so they do make progress, but there was no classes in that. And even to that end, we've ended up in a really strange place with what we do because, not to get too into the weeds, but in ceramic engineering, the science of pottery is called whitewares. Mm-hmm. And Bill Carty, my mentor in the engineering department, he just retired. And I haven't checked in recently, but last I heard, they may not fill that gap because all the ceramic engineers want to go into glass science. They want to go into bioceramics. They want to go into other ends. And whitewares is a different industry. Back in the day when I was studying with Bill Carty, I went to all these gigantic factories that were producing millions of pieces of pottery. They're all gone.
Yeah.
They are gone. But there are other places. Alex at East Fork is doing it, and Heath is still doing it. And there's lots of little up-and-coming companies that are doing it. But you have to be focused on doing that to that level of making, to that level of production and all of that. Mm-hmm. And it's totally plausible. But at the same time, you come out of school and are they still going to say, hey, let's set you up with an internship at Heath or at East Fork or at any of those places? It's something that we've tried to push at some of our schools, but it's hard because it's not the way that they're designed to work. And I think it's still a going concern because those future designers, materials people, process, quote unquote, engineers, they're going to come out of art schools. They're not going to come out of the traditional ceramic engineering programs. And art students are good. They'll often be condescended to by engineers because engineers have a high opinion of themselves often, but they are smarter than a lot of engineers. They just, again, I hate it, but it's the sort of the textbook versus the practical knowledge. And artists undersell the skills that they have. They just have to find the places to apply them if they want to.
Yeah. And to my professor's credit, you don't have the foresight of all. I think there's the kids going into undergrad now, from my perspective at least, are thinking through life after college so much more than I was at 18.
Yeah.
It was like, can I stay in this bubble forever? Because this is pretty great.
Yeah. And especially for what the cost of colleges are now, it's the pressure of parents are now saying, what is the job for these students when they get out of art school? And it cost a lot when I was a kid and when I was a student. And I'll never forget sitting around with my friend who went to theater school, and they were talking about how their school was going up $1,000 a year at that point. And that conversation was 23 years ago, and it's gone up more than $1,000 a year since then.
Yep.
And that's a massive amount of money for you to spend. And boy, if I had to give any piece of advice to the students out there, get an education, but be wary of debt. The debt is crushing, and you just have to do it wisely.
That was the thing about looking at getting a master's. For me, it was just like, there's no reason because it's not going to, the return on that, you know, and that to me is the unfortunate thing about that adjunct life of upper education too. And this is a whole different rabbit hole for a whole different podcast, but is to have a master's to even just teach at an adjunct level Because I would love to teach a class on business. I would love to teach upperclassmen or whoever, undergrad or anybody, like, this is the stuff you need to know to run a business as an artist. But there's no way I'm going to go back to get my master's to go teach one specialty class. Like, no, not going to happen.
God knows whatever they're offering you to pay for that.
Right.
Yeah, and it's the crazy thing of, like I was saying earlier, like, the way we were able to make it was this bizarre threading of the needle where, honestly, I saw what the adjunct situation was and I skated right through it. I happened to come up with something that put me in a position to be able to take advantage of it. But it's the same thing that happened with COVID during the online teaching. People have come to me for years and be like, well, how do I teach my wheel class online? And my answer is, I don't know. I don't teach wheel. It's not my... I can teach you how to teach glaze chemistry online, and I am not going to teach you how to do that. That's my gig. But yeah, like, it's totally hard. And I've talked to some art historians and been like, hey, y'all should really look at this. Or people in non-making media or non-physically production media. And there are ways to do that if you're smart about it. But a lot of it's a very tricky balance. And it's definitely like the thing between people on Instagram. And I've got a lot of friends that are like really Instagram famous from ceramics. And a lot of them don't have the formal education. You can argue, people will, about the quality of the Instagram work or whatever, but all I know is that those people are serious and that they have developed skills, and a lot of them are non-academic, and that it can be done. If you have passion, drive, and interest, then that's the motivation that you need to go forward.
Well, talk to me a little bit about, you mentioned the lifestyle between you and your theater friend, and also the fact that you and Rose have managed to thread this needle, because what I'm also fascinated about as a maker artist who's also married to a maker, there's not a lot of us out there. Frankly, like, part of the reason I started the podcast, honestly, at the beginning of this year was like, okay, how does this work? How do we make this work? Because for one, I'm too stubborn to believe that there's not a solution.
Yeah.
But most people, if they have a partner, that partner is traditionally employed. There's some other something going on that's not reliant on this crazy world that we're all in.
We are a total anomaly. Again, we threaded a needle. We don't have another gig. This is what we do full time. It's the two of us, and we brought in a business manager, and we've had people that help us mix glaze tests, but it's really just us doing it all the time. And crazy thing, Rose and I are together 24/7. We work from home, and like, she wishes she could be on the podcast, but like, literally somebody's got to chase the kids right at the moment. And I talk more and I'm louder. So she lets me do all the talking, and she's a little bit shy, and we just threaded that needle. And, I was just having this conversation with my father, and there's all that stuff about people who are doing it on their own, and how, the hard work to start your own business. And I'm like, no, we were lucky. We got crazy lucky. And it was stress because Rose had the full-time corporate job, and I was losing my mind. And we had sat down and going, okay, well, if we do this and we do this, and okay, there goes the health insurance. But then if this is what we made last year, then okay, there goes Obamacare kicking in for the health care. And that was, when she left her job, it was right around the 2016 election. And when, I don't want to get political, but when the side we were not supporting won, I was having a heart attack about like, oh my God, is this healthcare that we're relying on? Is this going to exist? And it's so crazy about America. Like, I can't imagine how many people would be able to run a business if there was a centralized government funded healthcare. But it is, honestly, I think it's elitism on the part of other businesses that they want to keep people tied to their system. Anyway, but
another podcast.
Okay. Yeah, that's another one. But that we just get along. We just complement each other really well. And we just both had the vision of this is what we're going to do. And it just so happened to work. And that was the crazy thing. Yeah. So unfortunately, I don't have a great answer except, well, shit happens. Got lucky.
I mean, to add to the layers of it, like bringing up the healthcare conversation, just to even, first and foremost, to be two adults who are self-employed, who are making a living together, one. And then to also have a family on top of it, because of the minuscule examples I have of partners who are both artists, you're the only one with kids, literally across the board. Now, some of that is people's personal choice, which is totally fine. Yeah. But I also wonder how much of the realities of being self-employed and an artist in the United States and healthcare factored into that personal choice. Or some people who just were like, yeah, it's rough and I can't we can't put the numbers together to figure out how that's going to work.
It's an absolute pragmatic reality. I definitely agree. I know a lot of people who don't have kids, and that there's a lot of those decisions that are based in that come to it. And for us, it was just, we always knew we were going to do it. And we were older. We were 33 when we had our first one. So we were always the planners. We were always the pragmatic people sort of trying to figure out and work it. But literally, like when Rose quit the corporate tile job, was our second one was 18 months old. Mm-hmm. And we were just like, okay, we're doing it. That's it. Like I said, it was only luck that at that point, I was making enough at CMW to mimic what she was making with her corporate job.
That's fantastic.
And that was all I knew. I knew that I could make enough to copy that. And that was the only thing that we had to push us over the edge. And yeah, it's that, and combined with the fact that she is tolerant enough to be annoyed with me constantly and then just move on, because we are together all the time. And it's been that way for 5 or 6 years now. And it's fine. It's great.
We joke that if there ever comes a point where we feel that, Francesco and I, so there was 5 months because of COVID when I had to leave Italy before we were back in the same country. It was kind of like, okay, so those 5 months are what's going to sustain the rest of our life for working together, living together, working from home together, all in the same space, because those 5 months sucked that bad. Anyway, that was a really funny point in which for the connection to do that.
I don't know how to edit around that.
I might just embrace this and be like, yep, well, there's technology.
That's living online.
Exactly. And exactly why we no longer want to live in separate countries.
Exactly right.
Full circle. Well, I know I'm pushing the limits of your time as well. So this is just the internet being like, hey, Rebecca, your time's up. What is there anything that you feel like for other makers, for other artists? Because I also think what's interesting in our conversation is to point out there are so many other ways to make a living around this art that we love that isn't always just the making.
It was a hard thing that Rose and I both had to go through emotionally, of detaching ourselves from being the maker. Mm. And you definitely get like a little sort of punch in the ego. And it's not even that. I made a very conscious decision. And when I left graduate school, a lot of my faculties, because I, at that point, had made the decision to not sort of chase traditional academic jobs, that I had one faculty member gave me a very hard time. She was like, you need to be a teacher. This is not, you have to be a teacher. Like, you are made for this. And I just couldn't, even at that point, I couldn't see the traditional academia. But we had to make this decision to sort of be in the background and be sort of hidden and to be a helper. And it's definitely weird when you're told that the position of glory is to be the maker. You're the name and your people are praising you for the thing that you did. And that's, everybody wants to be the front man in the band, but nobody wants to be playing rhythm guitar. And like, it's okay playing rhythm guitar. It's okay to be the sound man. What's more important is to be the best at what you can do. And I personally have a desire to make more ceramics people come into learning the making process and to helping others, or to have people, like we were saying earlier, building a team, man. If I had my druthers, if I could magic wand the ceramics community and say, here's how you make it, I'd be like, you make a team. Ding, you 4 people, you are now amazing Pottery Town X. And you all come together to work together to make that dream, and to stop sort of being like that. You have to be this like lone figure making art, because if we can come together, if somebody can be the kiln specialist and someone can be the glaze specialist and someone can be throwing and someone can be marketing and sales, it's going to be a lot easier to do that.
The podcast is now over forever because we found the solution, everyone. There's the end. Goodbye.
Well, I don't know if I trust me with that, but...
Matt, thank you so much for your time. I think as soon as people start typing the word ceramic into Instagram, they can find you. But
yeah, pretty much.
I will link it in the show notes. Is there anywhere else on the internet you would love people to come find what you and Rose are up to?
We're pretty much Ceramic Materials Workshop at all the places. But yeah, check out our podcast. That's our newest venture on all your favorite podcast platforms. If you've got a technical question, our big request is send us your technical questions. It is a community-driven podcast, and so we can sit there and talk all day, but we're out there trying to help all of you out there. So send us your questions. All those go to forfluxsakepodcast@gmail.com. So voice memos are best, but you can type them out if you're too self-conscious about talking about them. But we'd love to have your questions.
That podcast name is just freaking genius also. I love it so much. Because it goes so well with your humor. Everything just blends together.
We try to have a good time. You can't take anything too seriously. So
I'm going to get Francesco to send you some questions in because he's going through the painful process of recreating his recipes from Italy with American resources and an electric kiln instead of a gas kiln.
Yep.
He's not too happy about it.
It's possible. It's very possible to do so.
Oh, I'll send him your way. All right.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thanks so much, Matt.
That wraps up episode 205 on the podcast. And if y'all want to create that amazing pottery town and come together to specialize, I am all for it. Feel free to send me a DM at The Maker's Playbook and let's do it. I mean, at least you know you'll have nice photos. But in all seriousness, there's a reason I end every podcast by saying, together, we've got this. Entrepreneurship is often an uphill climb up a very steep mountain. So if you can have a guide, a shaman who's done it before and knows the way, then 1,000% pay for those resources and make the climb a little bit more manageable. If you aren't already following Rose and Matt over at Ceramic Materials Workshops on Instagram, go check them out. Buy their courses and make this crazy climb a little bit easier. If you're struggling with photographing the gorgeous glazes you then create after you learn all of the very non-magical properties of chemistry from Matt, then send me a DM at The Maker's Playbook and let's chat. Or if you immediately need a more consistent way to photograph your work right now, because you're supposed to be updating your shop for all those holiday sales and it's crazy overwhelming, well, then grab our photography cheat sheet at the link in the show notes. Or just DM me and I'll send it to you. It's 3 steps. They are not time consuming. They are super duper simple so that you can implement them right now during this crazy time of year, even if you're just using your cell phone. And it will kickstart you on the road to better photos. You've got to have the foundation before you start styling magical photos like East Fork. So go snag the cheat sheet. You can also get it by going to makers-playbook.com and clicking on the Get Free Photo Tips button in the top right corner. Should be pretty obvious. Plus, then, with your permission, I'll send you other free photo tips no more than once a month, so step by step you can easily start taking better photos of your work. All right, my friends. Until next week, go get back to making your dreams a reality. Because together, we've got this.